How do you make your writing more interesting? Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Dave Maslach talking about reciprocity.com. This is the sharing economy proofreading platform that I'm trying to build. You can check it out. The E is spelled with a 3. So what I wanted to talk about today was how do you make things more interesting? So believe it or not, writing and making things more interesting has actually been a scientific study or a study of what is interesting for a long, long time. At least 30 years we've been talking about this. So there's a classic article, it's called That's Interesting, and it's by Davis. It's in 1971. This is what I'm going to be basing this on. And I'm going to go into, what is interesting, what makes things interesting, and why it's so important, and then give you a couple of tips and tricks. And you definitely should go read this article if you are a PhD student. So again, this is part of my PhD or my Thesis Help, a series that I'm doing in YouTube of how to help PhD students that are writing a dissertation. And you could check that out. You can look at the older videos. So what is something that's interesting or why it's important? So in science, if you write an article, we have to send a journal article to a journal. The article gets reviewed by many different people. It could be 2, 3, sometimes 4 people. And if any one of those reviewers comments that this particular article is not interesting, there's nothing new here, then the article actually gets thrown out. We can't get it through the journal reviewing process, and we got to send it someplace else, or maybe just never pursue that article again. So this is a really tough problem that we as scientists have to focus on, how to make something interesting. And what is it that causes something to be interesting? So this is all about what's interesting is what catches your attention. So there is sort of a baseline threshold that we need as scientists. We have to first discover what is a gap in the literature, what's called a gap in the literature. That means that just simply somebody has not studied that particular thing before. But that is only just sort of the bare minimum. We have to think also about how do we make that thing that nobody studied before, how do we demonstrate that it's interesting and important to study as well? That is really incredibly, that's important to demonstrate this, right? To get people to jump into this and be excited about what you are doing. And so what you have to do, is catch people's attention. That's really important. So I want you to think about this, that attention is a resource. There is a substantial amount of literature that demonstrates that attention, the amount of attention that we have, whether you're a manager, whether you're a human being, the amount of attention that we have is constrained. We can't pay attention to everything. So we have to, our mind thinks in terms of how do we conserve this resource that we have, the amount of attention that we have, and how do we just focus in on one particular thing. I'm trying to focus in on you right now. My attention's directly at you because I know that this is interesting to me. So how you have to think about that is how do you capture somebody's attention and grab them and pull them in? How do you pull the reader into what you are doing, right? So you have to do something. So there's a trick to this. What you have to do is do something that's kind of quirky and slightly different, right? But at the same time is similar to what everybody knows already. Because what ends up happening, if it's too similar, if you're too different, people don't pay attention to that. It's really difficult to sort of grasp, get your mind around that. Your brain is trying to conserve resources, right? Trying to conserve as much resources as possible. So it tries to look for generalizations, and these generalizations are what those generalizations sort of allow your brain to work very quickly. But what you need to do is have a slight tweak or different sort of aspect to that. And that tweak or different thing is what's going to cause the people to pay attention to what's going on, right? So there are a couple of ways you can do this. You can look at things that are taken for granted. So this is what Malcolm Gladwell does. If you read any of his stuff, he just looks at things that are taken for granted, and then he says, oh, well, it's not what you think they are. It's not the way that you think it is. So you look at these taken for granted assumption, and then you try to look at it in a new light that somebody else hasn't looked at before. So this way of seeing the world, you look at it and you're like, oh, this is the way everybody, as soon as you hear the thing, well, we already know that. As soon as we already know that, this is obvious. That means that there's a great way that you can look at this in a different light to see something new and interesting, right? As soon as you hear that, that is a cue for you to say, oh, this is fantastic. I'm going to look at this in a different light and reveal some different, interesting, different way of viewing that, a different finding that we didn't think that was possible before. So that taken for granted assumption is really important. The other thing, it has to be believable. Again, this is where your mind is thinking in generalizations. This is the way that we know the world works. So it has to fit within that scheme of how the world works, this mental map of how the world works. So it has to be believable, and that is going to get you to the next step of getting people to actually pay attention to that, right? So those things are really important to think about. What is the sort of attention grabber? What is the taken for granted thing that you're sort of flipping around and you're saying, well, it's not quite the way that you think it is. And as well, it has to be believable, right? So how do we do that? And I encourage you to go look at Davis's article. I put it in the show notes. Um, and there's he has a huge list, but I'm just going to give you a couple of one. One of them is abstractions. So this is where you look at the world around you, and we think that the world, there's only this sort of minute thing that only happens in this one particular area. Um, so for example, there's this one bug in this one particular area, and you're a biologist, and you think it only exists in this one area. But then you find out, well, no, it's all over the world in these different locations. And that is really interesting because we didn't know that before, that it could possibly be in these different locations. So for example, when they found, and I'm not a biologist, so please forgive me, when they found the creatures in the deep sea that were surviving on the volcanic vents, where they thought there would be no possible way that there would be animals down that deep where there's no sunlight, and that's very oxygen depleted sort of a part of the ocean. They found these animals. That was really incredibly interesting, where we found that there was life that deep down into in the water that we couldn't possibly know before, right? So that was incredibly interesting. The next one is sort of generalizations, that we think something is sort of very specific to an area and we can generalize it to many different areas, or this mechanism can be generalized to many different areas, or that we think that there is only this mechanism that works in this particular thing, but it works in many different areas. These are really incredibly powerful ways of thinking about the world. And I repeat that the three things that you have to think about to make things interesting is make sure that you are engaging the attention of somebody somehow as much as possible. And attention is a resource. It can be consumed, right? So you have to think about, how do you capture that attention? Two, the what is taken for granted, and how you can sort of flip this and see the taken for granted assumption in a different way. And three, what is believable, what sort of fits within the mental maps of human beings or your audience at the same time. Now I have to sort of point out, what is interesting to some people is not interesting to everybody, and that's what you have to think about, right? That is very important to think about that. Think about your audience and how to capture them. So a general audience is going to find some stuff very interesting, but scientists are really weird, and they know a lot of sort of obscure things, so they're going to find different things interesting in different areas, probably in a very specific niche. if you're in one scientific area, you're going to find that, well, this is really interesting. But then somebody else may say, ah, that's not in a different scientific area. That's not interesting. Why are you doing that? That's banal. That's people have done that already in that particular area. But in this area, it's new and different, and it is enlightening that area of research that we haven't understood before, and that's happened a lot. Particularly in our field, I'm sure it happens in every other field where somebody is doing something and it's kind of old stuff in, say, biology, and we bring it into management. And this is actually called the NK modeling. When we bring it into management, it is a new and interesting, novel way of seeing the world that we didn't know before. But, in biology, it's 20, 30, 40 years old. So that will capture the attention of what people are thinking about in that particular sub niche, in that particular audience. So it's important to think about who your audience is when you do that. So that's it. That's all I wanted to say. If you like this video, do a thumbs up. If you don't like it, do one of those. As well, if you want to help out, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you can check out the reciprocity website. The E is spelled with a 3 in reciprocity. Go on there, look it up. It's going to help science. It's going to help you, I hope. I'm trying to make sure that it's really fun to interact and get your work proofread on there, and as well as get other, if you want to proofread, you can go on there as well. 100% free if you just maintain within the system. If you want to take stuff out, you want to take credits out, then there is a system charge that's just going to pay for it in the long run. That's what I'm hoping for at this moment. So check it out, and I'm looking forward to talking to you in another video. Take care and have a good day. Bye.